Hello, everybody, and welcome to this is part two of a really incredible story that, we're going to get into it now in this episode. So what I'm going to do is, okay, because this is part two, and if you're joining part two and you haven't seen part one, I'm going to leave a link above here or over here for part one, okay? I suggest if you have the time, click that link and watch part one. If you don't have the time, I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. I'm going to give you a quick summary of part one right now. So I'm giving you like maybe 3 or 4 seconds to click away and click on part one. Okay, so here's a summary now of part one. So right now, Dakota is in Salt Lake City, Utah, USA, but he grew up in Houston, Texas. Dakota was born in Isan, Thailand in the early 1970s. Dakota's father and mother met when Dakota's father served in the U.S. Army in Vietnam and spent time in Thailand. The family, Dakota's mom and dad and him, moved to the USA 3 months after Dakota was born, and they moved to Houston, Texas. Unfortunately, the relationship between his mom and dad didn't last too long, and Dakota in part one describes his dad as the typical American cowboy, which I thought, that obviously you can picture like guns and, that kind of a character. And I don't think that kind of wild character is going to kind of gel with a Thai person too well. And anyway, so Dakota's mom left Thailand, and unfortunately, Dakota lost all contact with Thailand and his mom and his Thai family for many years. And as Dakota grew up, he experienced racism in Houston, Texas, back in the 70s and the 80s. And one day, and this is the big one in part one, this is the kind of the really strange and unusual and one of those moments in life where you can't explain it. Nobody can explain it, but something happens. One of those moments. So one day, Dakota's friend introduced him to a Thai exchange student who tracked down Dakota's Thai family. And actually, in part one, Dakota says that he had never even heard Thai being spoken until he was in his 20s. You were in your 20s, yeah? You were in your 20s?
Actually, I was in my early 30s.
Early 30s, okay. Early 30s, and he met a Thai exchange student, and this Thai exchange student was able to contact Dakota's Thai family in Thailand, who he hadn't heard from for many years. And unfortunately, Dakota learned that his mom had passed away in that time when she had gone back to Thailand. And so off Dakota goes to Thailand to meet his Thai family, and he ends up staying there, getting a job teaching English in a school in Bangkok. And then he meets his now wife while he was working in Bangkok, and they move back to the States where they work and save for their future. Dakota goes back and goes to university and improves his education, and they have plans to come back to Thailand in the near future after Dakota has a kidney transplant. So this is where we are in the story. And today, okay, so that's part one. And today we're going to talk about how Dakota got Thai citizenship, because that's quite an interesting story as well, and an issue with land ownership in Thailand because we're going to get into that in a second. So those are the two topics that we're going to get into, which is part two of our story. So Dakota, thank you very much. I better clear my throat after all that.
Okay, that's a good summary.
It's a great story, really is. I mean, folks, if you're watching this, you got to think of this as like a podcast and not your typical kind of vlog. This is going to go on longer. You've already clicked on it now and you got to this stage, so it's a pretty long one, but it's going to be a good one because I know what's coming up. Trust me, it's going to be good. So Dakota, thank you very much. Anyway, you get into it and I'll just hang back and listen.
Okay. When I was about 11 or 12 years old, my dad came up to me with this old piece of paper slash certificate, and he handed it to me. And I remember looking at it and I couldn't read it. And I looked up to him and I asked, "What is this?" He says, "You were not born in America. You were born in Thailand. This is your Thai birth certificate." And I went, "Oh, what do you want me to do with it?" And he said, "You need to hold on to that and never lose it. It's very important. It's yours." I said, "Okay." So at that point, I just put it in a folder and kept it with me in my bedroom. And so through all my teenage years, I had it throughout my 20s as I entered the world and adulthood. Everywhere I moved to, material things came into my life, came out of my life, but I held on to this folder containing this little certificate that I couldn't even read. And so now I'm in my 30s, early 30s, and in part one, the story of how I got to Thailand. And so whenever I moved to Thailand, I entered the country as a US citizen. I used my US passport. I entered with a non-immigrant B visa. I got a job teaching and was given a work permit. And so for all intensive purposes, I was strictly a US citizen living and working in Thailand, full stop. And in my second or maybe third year living in Thailand, I had this certificate, my Thai birth certificate. And what got the ball rolling, realizing that I should probably get my Thai citizenship officially, I had, I'll call it a small disagreement with one of the teachers at the school I worked with. It resulted in this teacher threatening to call the police on me and have me deported. And so I took that threat serious, thinking to myself, can I really be deported by someone simply going to the police? And so I contacted an attorney in Bangkok and said, "Hello, I would like to become a Thai citizen. I'm an American. I have a Thai birth certificate. What would that cost?" Well, this attorney quoted me 20,000 baht. I said, "Okay." From there, I traveled to Isan, to my mom's little brother's house, and spoke to him. And I pulled out my folder, showed him this certificate, and that was the first time in my life I showed that certificate to anyone. And when my uncle saw it, his eyebrows went up. It was a wow moment for him. And I remember him looking at it, and in his limited English, he said, "You are Thai." And I think at that first moment, that's when he truly began to, or I'll say he accepted me more.
Okay.
And because keep in mind, at this point, they kind of regard me as American, and they see the certificate And they said easy. So the next day, my uncle, which is my mom's little brother, his wife, and my cousin, or a cousin of mine, we drove to, they call it the Amper office, like the government office.
Yeah.
And we walk in, and within minutes, literally within minutes, I'm standing in front of this, I guess, wall, and they took a picture of me. And then we're sitting down on this bench waiting. Then all of a sudden, this very serious looking man in a military uniform, a decorated military uniform, at least from my point of view, walked up to us. And he starts talking to my uncle. And within a minute or two, I was instructed to get up on my feet, and we all, let's see, one, two, three, four of us walked into this man's office. And the military officer, he sat at his desk. My aunt and uncle and myself sat opposite him. And this meeting, I guess I'll call it, went on for about 45 minutes. And the military guy would talk to my aunt and uncle in Thai, and then he would turn to me speaking English. Basically, he wanted to know my life story and confirm that I did not speak Thai. And basically, he was under the assumption that I left Thailand and went to America to avoid military duty.
But you're only 3 months old.
That's what we had to explain to him. There was never, ever any thought of me avoiding any military duty. Because now, at that point, I learned that Thai men have this legal requirement to sign up for the military. And I'd never done that before. And so, to make a long story short, he wanted to know my life story, what I did in America, and he wanted to know how I got in touch with my Thai family. And so I told him the whole story, just like I shared with you. And I gave him the name of the foreign exchange student, where he lived in Bangkok. And he emphasized to me that even though I was about 35 at the time, that he can take me into his military anytime he wanted, up until age 49. He said, I can
And
call
were you
you.
scared? Were you kind of scared?
I was a little afraid, yes. I was. And yes, I was a little afraid. And I was thinking, okay, he's going to pull me in and have me do something that I can do. Obviously, I don't read, write, and speak Thai, but in the military, there's a saying, we will find the job you can do. That's the saying. No matter how smart, how dumb you are, there is something in the military you can do. So I'm thinking, oh my God, am I going to be in the Thai army? And so, but I figured it wouldn't be anything too hard. I mean, I'm very limited as far as communicating, but I think what he wanted to know is, like I said, just my life story, and that I wasn't avoiding anything, and that he wanted me to understand that if I become a Thai citizen, I'm subject to being called into the military up until age 49. And I said, okay, I understand. I understand my obligation as a Thai citizen. And this went on for about 45 minutes. And after that, we all walked out back into the main area, and I was given my Thai ID card. I was a Thai citizen. And I walked out of there. And when I traveled back to Nakhon Pathom, I shared with a few of my coworkers, my colleagues, that hey, I'm a Thai citizen now. I don't have to do any visa renewal or work permit. And they all quickly said, don't tell anyone. Do not tell the school or no one you have Thai citizenship. And
That's very clever that they said that, because, and you're going to tell us why. I know you know why.
yes, and I was confused. And why would I not share that? I didn't do anything wrong. And they said, mate, if you tell the school you're a Thai, they're going to cut your salary in half instantly.
Yeah.
He said, because the salary we get is a foreign teacher's salary. And if you go marching in there with your Thai ID card, you are no longer a foreign teacher. You're a Thai teacher. And I says, but I'm a native speaker. No one cares about that. It's your citizenship. And they pointed out there are several teachers, or at least were several teachers at the time, whose English really wasn't that good, but because they had a foreign passport, they were given a foreign teacher's salary.
Okay.
And so I took their advice. I didn't argue. I said, okay, you guys have been living here a lot longer than me. And so I never did tell the school. So for the next, I guess what, 4 years, 5 years, I went through the motions and renewed my visa. Well, the school took care of it, renewed the visa, renewed the work permit, and never said a thing. In fact, I even went out one day and got a Thai passport. And to this day, I've never used either. I never used my Thai ID card for anything. My Thai passport, I've never used it to go in or out. And in fact, in 2019, roughly almost 3 years ago, my wife and I went to Thailand to visit just for a month, and they would not let me use my Thai passport to enter the country.
Why not?
I have no idea. They said, no, you're American, you're Falam. Where's your US passport? And I had it with me. I had both of my passports with me.
But you should be allowed to use the Thai passport when you go in.
That's what I thought. And I mean, it was midnight, and it was a female immigration officer. And she said, I even doubled down and said, hey, I'm Thai, I want to go in. She said, no, US passport.
Let's leave that one to the comments. If anyone in the comment section knows, if anyone knows, write in the comment section why that would happen. Because I know a guy who is half Thai, half Polish, and he does it all the time, where he'll fly out and he'll fly back in his Thai passport. So I don't know what happened there.
Yes, and so, but now initially I wasn't going to say anything about my U.S. passport, but whenever I showed her my Thai passport, it did not have an exit stamp. Okay. And that's what started the whole thing. She asked, why no exit stamp? Because keep in mind, this was going to be the first time ever using my Thai passport It was totally clean, no stamps at all. And so she kept pointing, exit stamp. And that's when I said, it's in my US passport. And she said, let me see. And so I showed her my US passport. She says, okay. And I tried to argue with her. Keep in mind, this is midnight. And she said, no, no, US passport only. And my wife tried to reason with her, and she said no. And so I really didn't feel the need to argue. Looking back, I was told that I could have asked for a supervisor or someone higher ranking, but that would have entailed me waiting till business hours. I think what I experienced was just a result of a lower ranking immigration official. And I think the situation would have been rectified had I waited for a higher ranking official. It would have been fine.
So let's jump into the part where, okay, so you get your Thai citizenship, and then let's go into the whole issue with the land.
Okay, in January of 2008 is when the very first time I showed up to Thailand as an adult. They showed me my mom's land, and they said this is where she lived. That was her home. It was vacant. And at this point, she had passed away 5 years prior. So the remnants of her house, it was pretty much falling apart. And they said, this is your land. And the size of the land we're talking about is 0.63 rai. Is what we're talking about. And they said, it's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. And I said, okay. And I didn't really have many thoughts about it. But I think a day or two later, we all get into the truck and we drove to this government office. And I remember when we got out of the truck and I asked, what is this place? Because it's obviously it was some sort of official place. And they said, oh, this is for your land. We signed documents for your land. And at that point, I was under the impression that signing these documents would officially make the land mine. That's the impression I was under. And so I'm thinking, okay, that's a good idea. So we walk in, and the documents they put in front of me are obviously in Thai. And they said, this is your land, you sign. And I said, okay, now we're talking about my second, maybe third day in Thailand. And so I signed this document, and I'm feeling good. Wow, I own land in Thailand. And so this was January of 2008. And I came back to Thailand in April of that same year, stayed the entire month, celebrated Songkran, and had a good time. And that's when the idea of me moving to Thailand came up. And I said, okay. And then that's when the whole idea of me working as a teacher came up. And I told them, if I were to move here, in all due respect, I cannot live their lifestyle on a long-term basis because they live very primitive in Thailand. Very primitive. They don't even have running water in the house. And
Which part of Thailand are we talking about? Up
we're
northeast, right?
talking the northeast region. The province is called Amnatcharon. And so when I'm visiting, I'm living in my aunt and uncle's house. That's where I'm staying. And their house is a typical rural home, no running water. And in fact, when I bathed myself, it was very, very old school. It was this barrel full of water. You take a bowl and you just pour it over you. And that's how you soap, bathe, and rinse yourself off. And I can do that for a short period of time. And the house really didn't have proper electricity. So it's very primitive. And so I said, hey, if I live here, I need a place a little more comfortable. And so they brought up the idea of building a house for me where my mom's house was. And I asked, how much would something like that cost? And they said, a nice house for you with indoor plumbing, proper electricity, air con, about $20,000 US. And I said, okay. And I can do that. And they drove me around. In fact, there was a foreigner who lived in the area. They showed me his house just from the street. And it was just a nice little home, comfortable. And they said it would be similar to that. And I said, okay. And so I gave them the money. And during the course of that year, they built a house, a very nice house.
Do you have any photos?
Yes, I'll send those to you. Yes.
Yeah, we'll stick some photos up.
Yeah, and I mean, a very nice house. I mean, nothing. I mean, it's not big, but I don't need a big house. It's just me, and it has 3 bedrooms, a proper bathroom, indoor plumbing, electricity, air con. That's all I need. That's all I need, and so that was my house. And they even gave me a little, I guess they call it a blue book.
Yeah.
Says that I live there. And so I'm feeling good. And so whenever I would visit, that's where I would sleep. I had a comfortable place. I was happy, couldn't have been happier. And so when we moved back to the US in 2015, now this is definitely cheating. I'll call it that, because about a year later, a cousin of mine contacted me and said, "Hey, your uncle did something really bad." And I asked, "What did he do?" He says, "He took ownership of your house." And I asked, "How did he do that?" And apparently my uncle, I guess, had some kind of relationship with someone at the Amper and transferred ownership of my house from my name to his name. And that's when I found out that same with the land, that I don't own the land. And that document I signed put the land out of my name and into his name.
So they tricked you.
They tricked me. Yes. They tricked me. Yes. Because when I initially went to the Amper signing that document, I was under the impression that It was my land. I owned it. But no, I owned it by default because I am my mother's son. But by signing that document, it was a release.
Oh my God.
And that put it in my uncle's name. And I never knew that. Even when the house was being built, I never knew that it wasn't my land.
Do you think that they got you to build a house so they could get the house? I mean, they own the land at that point.
Yes, it sure looks that way on the surface. And I'll get more into the story. So now we build this house. I have this blue book. So at this point, unbeknownst to me, my uncle owns the land, but yes, I own the house. I've got this blue book. But then in 2015, my wife and I left Thailand. A year later, he wants to, I guess, singleize the deal. He already owns the land. He goes to the Amper, shows them that, and I guess someone at the Amper worked with him and transferred ownership of my house, even though I have possession of the blue book. I still have it. It's right here. Somehow, without me even being present there, I'm gonna make a safe assumption that someone signed my name. It wasn't me releasing my house into my uncle's name, and now my uncle has ownership of both the land and the house. And my cousin who contacted me said that him and my uncle had a very big argument over this. My cousin was telling my uncle that, hey, that's wrong. And my uncle wasn't having any of it. And so then I think when they told me that the house was $20,000 to build, I found out later that the house was only $10,000 to build, and that they used the other $10,000 to build a second home.
Wow.
And so I guess I got fleeced.
Yeah.
I got fleeced because
That's the
a
word. Yeah.
foreigner,
Fleece.
yeah, I guess a foreigner would maybe pay 20,000 for the house, but a Thai would only pay $10,000 for the house. But because they got 20,000 out of me, they had enough funding to build not one, but two houses.
Where did they
And
build the second house?
just a few blocks away, my aunt and uncle have their own plot of land. It's literally about maybe 3 blocks down. Because
Okay.
my mom lived here 1, 2, 3 blocks, my aunt and uncle. And so now there's two houses. I mean, obviously a person can't live in two houses at the same time. I don't know what's being done with the house that was built for me. I know it's for a fact I still have the blue book and I still have the keys.
So have you been back there?
No, at the point, the reality is I don't feel comfortable going back there.
So this has happened and you have not gone back there yet. Like, yeah, this has happened when you were back in the States.
Yes,
You found out about it, yeah?
yes. My cousin told me, and or one of my cousins, I have several cousins, he told me, and I have never gone back. And it's crazy to say, but even though it's my money that funded the places, I feel uncomfortable going back. I've exchanged a few messages with him and just pleasantries. Hey, how are you doing? Checking in. How's everyone? But I've never brought up the house or the property.
Any contact with your uncle?
No, just any contact I have is with my uncle's daughter. Just like I said, just basic messages, just checking in. How are you doing? And they'll post a picture on Facebook or something, and I'll click like, and that's it.
How old is your uncle?
He is 70. He's
Okay.
70.
Everyone, his daughters and his sons, they know about what's happened.
I think they do. I don't see how they couldn't know. They live in the same house. So yeah, they would have to know.
Do you
And
have any idea like why he would do that?
because I'm American, and there's this perception that I'm rich, and in fact, I detected a little bit of that when I visited there during April of '08, because I funded that entire month. And I'm very generous. I don't mind if I'm willing to share. But during that 4 weeks in April, probably going into the second, maybe third week, I did sort of put the brakes on the money we were spending. And for example, we would go to a restaurant and I would say, hey, I just wanted us to go. I don't want the pickup truck full of people, because I would be footed with the bill. I quickly saw that pattern developing. And so I did sort of deflate the balloon a little bit. I want to have a good time, but I don't want to give the entire village, all 100 of my relatives, a good time. I'm not rich. I mean, I'm okay, but I'm not rich. But I think a lot of people in Thailand, and not just Thailand, many countries across the world, third world countries, have this perception that Westerners are just flush with money. And maybe I did something to add to that. I know the clothes I wear on average are nicer looking, maybe a little more expensive looking than the average rural Thai.
The province, I'm not sure on, right? It's very much,
Yeah,
it's quite a very, I mean, it's very far from Bangkok. I mean,
very,
we're
yes.
talking about 8, 9, 10, 11 hours from Bangkok by car.
It's a 12-hour drive.
12 hour, okay.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, does it border Laos?
It's 1 hour from the border.
Okay, so it's very
1 hour.
much a rural place.
Very rural. I mean, there's a reason the U.S. military chose that area during the Vietnam War to set up shop, because of its strategic location to Vietnam. It's the closest you can get to Vietnam without being in Vietnam. And that's why they set up shop there. And so yes, it's you don't get much more rural than that.
Like, it's not a place that you hear many people even talk about.
No, no, nope, not at all.
I've never met
And
anybody from there, I don't think.
no, it's not a big province, not geographically, not in any way, not politically, not economically. There's not much to it. Like I was telling you in part one, when I first flew there, I flew from Bangkok into Ubon Ratchathani Airport, which Ubon Ratchathani is the next province over. And then when we drove from that airport into Amnacharon, it was about at least a solid 1 hour, maybe a little more, nothing but a narrow 2-lane road surrounded by tall trees. That's how rural this place is. And the people who live there, very primitive. And like I was telling you earlier, no running water, no proper electricity. And that's just the way they live. And they still live very much off the land. And so, but it was an interesting experience. Do I regret it? Yes and no. Obviously, I regret the part of getting fleeced. My emotions got the best of me.
What do you
And
think your Thai, like, how does your Thai wife feel about all this?
she doesn't like it at all. There's no part of her that likes it. And that's just the way it is. And she's not comfortable going over there. And I remember the one time I brought my wife there, I wanted them to meet this lady who I was going to marry and ended up marrying, and they did not hit it off very well.
Why not?
And I think, well, when I first got to Thailand, they were introducing me to several young ladies because I get there
Okay.
and they see I'm single, I don't have any children, and they just kept on, bringing these ladies to meet me. When I first arrived, this was January 2008, and again in April of 2008, and I kept saying, "Oh, thank you, I'm fine. It's okay." Because keep in mind, these are ladies who did not even speak a word of English.
Okay.
And so I just could not see how a relationship like that could work. When
But
I
when your
brought
when your
my,
Thai wife went to meet your family, what happened there? Like, you said they didn't get on. What was the why
I
not?
think, I think they regarded her as someone who was with me only because I was American. And I think they rejected her because she wasn't part of their village. She was a lady from Bangkok, is what I think. I think they regarded her as Paiso
Okay.
because she was able to speak English with me and communicate with them. And my wife is a lady who wears makeup and gets her hair done, just a typical lady from Bangkok. And I think they felt she wasn't one of them. Because I've learned in Thailand, there is a division between people in Bangkok and people in rural areas.
Well, I mean, absolutely. If you look at the picture behind me here, I mean, this is a proper metropolitan city, New York,
Yes.
LA, Chicago. And then if you were to suppose match that, compare that with, you know, I don't know, give me the most rural, somewhere in Louisiana. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Right,
Like,
right. So there is that division, and they regarded her as someone who wasn't part of them. And I don't think there was anything I can I could have done about that. And because marrying someone or being with a lady from that area is just, it would be too much of a gap. And whereas my wife, I feel we can communicate a little more. and it just didn't fit what they wanted from me.
There's no contact from her with your Thai family at all. She's no contact with them.
Nope, she wants nothing to do with them because she even, I remember her telling me they don't like me, and I don't know what they said to her, but I remember, after she was talking with my uncle said something, and even though I don't understand the words, I can see the body language, and it didn't look very inviting. And I remember when we walked out of the house, she said, your uncle does not like me. And I just kind of, I didn't ask why. I definitely detected it, and I just left it at that. And in life, we can't make everyone happy, and we can't live our lives for other people.
So what do you think is going to happen now? Do you think you're going to follow it up, or like say you would go back to Thailand the next 2 years or 1 or 2 years? What's going to happen then?
I'm gonna go visit them just out of respect. I'm not. My wife is not gonna come with me. I know that. She's just gonna say, "Hey, you go alone," and I totally respect her. And I'll just see. I'll see how they treat me, and just be cordial. And like I said, just out of respect, I'm related to them. Nothing would change it. And I hope that we can at least maybe be a part of one another's life, at least visit every now and then. And that's it. Because we are related. Can't change it, can't take it away.
Super interesting story, Dakota. I mean, part 1, part 2, great. And I want to ask anyone if they have any comments, leave them in the comment section below. And Dakota, you'll try and answer any of the comments, because I'm sure people are going to have questions. I want to know what's going on. So yeah, any questions, leave them in the comment section and Dakota will answer them. And if you haven't already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. We're going for 4,000 by Christmas. We are at like 3,700, 300 more, and we hit the 4,000. So Dakota, it's a pleasure. And if you're ever in Bangkok, well, I know you're going to be back in Bangkok, but look me up. Yeah, don't forget.
Yeah,
all right.
Do.
Okay, take care of yourself.
All right, you too, Pete.
Thank you very much, and best of luck for the kidney operation. I hope it goes well, and take care of your health. And it was a pleasure to meet you.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, take it easy.
Okay,
right. I'm gonna go now.
All right.
Okay, take it easy. Dakota. See you. Bye.
All right.